Thanks for joining us and welcome to the interview. My name's Philip Bateman from Bravo Charlie, and I'm here with Dr. Stephanie Gripne, who's been referred to by Forbes magazine as the Steve Jobs of impact investing. And Stephanie's on a mission to move $1 trillion into impact ventures. As the macro trends of global capital movement, environmental awareness, and a technologically enmeshed society converge, now is the time for radical action. And I'm really excited that after 11 years with Bravo Charlie, about 100 projects and 2,000 pieces of content, the new focus for the company is targeted video communication for impact investors and their portfolio, which is why I'm here in Denver, Colorado with Dr. Gripne. Stephanie, moving $1 trillion into impact investing, what does that look like on the ground?
That's a great question. Over the past 3 years, we have piloted the first ever statewide, so the geography of one state, double-sided marketplace for impact investing. And over that course of the 3 years, we had a goal to catalyze $100 million. We knew if we could get to $100 million, we could start talking about how you scale product at the billion-dollar level. And I'm happy to report we did 200 education events on the ground in one single state, the state of Colorado, and we sourced 500 projects, nonprofits, small businesses, startups, funds, co-ops, tandem hybrid organizations. But more importantly, we identified, educated, and activated close to 50 new impact investors. And those were individuals, private foundations, community foundations, donor-advised fund holders, and corporations. And then every 18 months, we'd bring everybody together in essentially a double-sided farmer's market. And we would introduce the investors to the investment opportunities, the social ventures, and we blew it out of the water. We catalyzed about $260 million of investment right now into 260 investments. And so we easily hit our goal of moving $100 million.
And to take it back to basics, how do you define a social impact venture?
So we define that by anybody that has an entity that is doing well by doing good. So it doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit where you are trying to refinance your building or start a social enterprise or make an asset more efficient, or you're a small business that's trying to make the world a better place, or a startup that's actually trying to grow a tech SaaS play, but you're trying to do so in a way that's solving the social problems, such as Silvernest that connects the aging population to housemates for additional income, companionship, and help around the house.
And we're sitting here in Prodigy Coffee. Can you tell us about this place?
Yes, Prodigy Coffee is a social enterprise in Denver, and the Denver Foundation is a community foundation, and I served on the Impact Investment Committee, and we actually made an investment, a loan into Prodigy Coffee that actually trains youth of Denver, Colorado, how to run a coffee business and work in the coffee business and actually run it. So it's a workforce training job for some of the most vulnerable kids of our community.
And traditionally, I was always thinking of investment opportunities as startups, as businesses ready to go. And based on our conversation on the table out there, it seems that you've unlocked a whole new way of moving capital into organizations such as nonprofits that care, or anybody really. Could you tell me more about that?
Yes, part of our success, most people might be surprised, but the two big successes with the Impact Finance Center, the nonprofit social we are a nonprofit multi-university academic center. We're two nonprofits. One was our local Museum of Contemporary Art. They had a mortgage that was going to expire, and we helped give them the strategy that they executed. And they were able to get a foundation and two individuals to do a 1% loan. In the case of the foundation, it was money they were going to give away, which we would say would have a negative 100% financial return. So they were taking money they were going to give away in a grant. They did a 1% loan, got a 101% return. That 1% savings saved the Museum of Contemporary Art $565,000 a year. That's as if you were giving it an unrestricted operating grant of over $500,000. We also, I led, from design to construction, I led the Alliance Center, and it was a nonprofit shared space, and it was a historic building renovation. We were short $6 million. And so I worked with the donor, and we opened up a donor-advised fund at the Denver Foundation and asked them to allow us to make a loan to that nonprofit that allowed us also to do a historic tax renovation or historic tax credit, those combined investments saved us $6 million and gave the donor 101% return plus a tax deduction. So yes, we believe that in Colorado alone, there's probably $50 billion of impact investment opportunities just on assets like buildings that you can make more efficient, not to mention the social enterprises.
And you started this in 2012. We're 7 years on now.
Yeah.
What would you do differently now you know what you know?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the easiest way to answer that is, since we wrapped up our 3-year pilot with Colorado Impact Days, we've had about 15 requests from around the world that have said, Stephanie, we're in Johannesburg or Serbia or Vancouver or Boise or Sao Paulo. We want to do Impact Days. And so for most of these people from the outside, they're looking at Impact Days as kind of the best of Startup Week meets a Gives Day. So really public infrastructure. And we say, don't do what we did. Don't do 200 education and classes and kind of build it as you come. We're going to give you Impact Days in a box. So start with an impact investing giving circle. The key is to identify, educate, and activate the investors to invest in these nonprofits and for-profits. So train about 40 investors in partnership with the Community Foundation. We will give you the glossy, an example grant. We will support you on that effort. And then just so you know, we're taking our 200 education events that we delivered in person and we're putting them online and creating the Impact Investing Institute. So if you call us 5 years from now, 3 years from now, our hope, we'll give you a manual to start Sao Paulo Impact Days. We will give you a license to our institute, and we'll hopefully give you a seed grant. So whether you want to start Sao Paulo Impact Days, Brazil Impact Days, or South America Impact Days, we'll try to give you that infrastructure in a box.
And what can people do to support you in accelerating that process?
That's a great question. 2 things. We are still a nonprofit rolling off the social enterprise. So we're interested in raising gift capital, grant capital, sponsorship capital, as well as loans to do this work. We're essentially going to create an impact education tech SaaS play that's sliding scale social justice. So we'll charge market rate to those that can afford it, and for those entities that want to access our education, we'll provide a sliding scale scholarship to allow them to get access to that education.
I know one of the comments I saw on your Impact Finance Center was a testimonial about you not having your hand in the pocket in relation to providing investment advice. How does that stack with what you just told me?
That's a great question. One, we don't provide any investment advice. We're not registered by the SEC. And to that point, if you start asking, go ask anybody you meet and ask them, where does an individual or organization, especially over $10 million, go to get non-conflicted education? Who doesn't have a conflict with the entity? What do we mean by that? Somebody that isn't trying to actually earn their business and manage those assets, whether it's philanthropic assets or the investment assets. So we think there needs to be more non-conflicted education providers. That's why we're structurally designed as a nonprofit. So we're doing investor education, not advice. And so that means that we don't have a conflict of interest with the individual or the organization actually doing the investing.
And as we talk about education, I know you're also doing a piece to catalyze more youth awareness of the fact that they can grow businesses. What was the hole you saw between community college and Ivy League business schools?
Oh, that's also a wonderful question. When I was looking around the United States, I'm still looking for this number, if somebody can tell me how many entrepreneurship centers there are, whether you're at a university, a college, a community college, and my estimate is there's about 600 of those. And so back in 2012, Matt Bannock and Paula Goldman of the Omidyar Network wrote a paper, and they said, it's as if the impact investors are waiting around the proverbial water pump for the flood of deals to flow, but nobody wants to prime the pump, meaning that somebody had to go train the nonprofits and for-profits about how to do that. They had investments. And our point is, don't prime the pump and get the entrepreneurs excited if you're not going to prime the pump on the money. You've got to do that same infrastructure investment. And so when I left University of Colorado as a professor in 2012, I was like, if we have 600 entrepreneurship centers, we need 600 innovative financial centers within those universities, impact investing centers that are going to identify, educate, and activate that capital to actually invest in those social entrepreneurs. So the Impact Finance Center is designed to be a nonprofit multi-university academic center where we'll license our content to any university that wants access to that education around the world.
And that education you're providing for the investors through the universities?
We do. The education both inside the universities and outside the universities.
So that it's not for the entrepreneurs.
We have classes for the entrepreneurs, the nonprofits and for-profits. In that, nonprofits don't realize that they have investments within them.
Could you expand on that?
Yeah, so you talk about a typical nonprofit. Mount Humane is one. I just was visiting my hometown in Idaho, and it's a no-kill shelter. And so there's lots of investment opportunities within Mount Humane. It's actually a physical building, so you could actually invest in the mortgage and refinance it at a lower rate. It doesn't take rocket science to say, if you take a $5 million mortgage at 6% and you refinance it at 2%, you're going to save that nonprofit millions of dollars. They might also have a line of credit. In this case, they provide affordable housing for their workers that work there. You could actually invest in the building renovation to make the affordable housing better. So when you think of nonprofits, I think of them generally having opportunities to finance or refinance debt, like a line of credit, a mortgage, make an asset more efficient, launch or grow a social enterprise, or do a pay-as-you-save social impact bond, where they're actually bringing investment capital to actually implement an intervention where the long-term beneficiaries would come back and pay back and reimburse those savings.
My experience of meeting social justice organizations or the people who found them and work in them is that they are so far away from financial awareness in relation to the management and the scaling of the organization around the financial structuring of it. And I noted in the 2019 Global Impact Investor Survey, they said credible knowledge of financial instrumentation is the lacking thing in the marketplace. We need more people who know about finance. And so, I mean, is there a space for people who are traditionally in finance, in investing, to sort of move with the wave of millennial desire to work in organizations that care and come into this space and start advising these not-for-profits on access to this capital? Because what we're talking about here isn't in the management teams of these organizations.
Absolutely. It actually goes both directions. For example, so if I'm talking to a group of donors about investing into a for-profit startup, I'll typically get the response, Stephanie, I'm a donor, I'm not an investor, even though they have significant assets. And I'll say, let's take Silvernest. We talked about that for a second. It's an online technology company to connect the aging population for housemates for additional income, companionship, and help around the house. So we'd like to say it's AARP meets Match.com meets Airbnb. And the whole concept about that is it's a tech SaaS play, but it has a lot of impact areas. It's women-led, it's aging, intergenerational connectivity, affordable housing, economic development. If I ask a typical donor to invest in that startup, they'll say, Stephanie, I'm a donor, I'm not an investor. And then I'll say, well, could we pretend it's a nonprofit for a minute? And they would say, well, sure, I guess so. And I would say, would you do a $25,000 donation? And they'd say, yes, I would. And I said, let's unpack that for a minute. For some reason, we give nonprofits our highest risk capital. The very successful entrepreneurs who serve on these boards don't allow them to take risk. They have to be cash on cash. They're not allowed to fail. They're not allowed to leverage and take on growth capital. And then you switch over to those entrepreneurs. 85% of the time, they're going to give you a nonprofit grant return of negative 100% financial return, and they don't even have to make the world a better place. And they're allowed to risk and fail. They don't have to be cash on cash. But you do have a 10 to 15% chance of getting your money back. And so I feel like there's a third way. What happens if we take the best of the nonprofit folks and we combine it with the best of the for-profit folks and we create a third pathway that allows us to take our highest risk capital and use the best parts of the for-profit world with the best parts of the nonprofit world. So I think it's an intermixing of the two.
Beneficial organizations that can take risk and scale rapidly because they're there for a purpose.
Absolutely.
And tell me about 10X and whaling ships. Tell us about 10X
Ross
and whaling ships.
Ross Baird wrote a book, The Innovation Blind Spot. Highly recommend it. And it's interesting because you realize, a friend of mine told me, the angel investment is the only investment that starts with a mutual lie. The investors know you're not going to get to 10x, and the social ventures, the startups know that they're not going to get to 10x either. And so then you start asking, wait, why are we even shooting towards 10x return? And if you ask a typical person, they would say, well, if we're investing in 10 entities and only one's going to do really well, we have to get that level of return in order for that risk. And it's like, wait, why are we shooting for one thing to be successful out of 10? What if 8 things were successful out of 10? Well, that might take a different type of capital. And so you unpack and go, the 10x concept actually came from whaling ships, I believe, in the 1500s. And so as monarchs and monarchies and the elite would send out whaling ships, it was too expensive for them all to own one of them, given that only 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 would come back with an actual whale. And so they did fractional ownership of the whaling ships. And so we have that legacy concept of 10x that we've now adopted that drives all of our economy if you're a startup. There's not buckets of 8x money or 6x money or 5x money walking around. And I want to give a shout out to our colleagues in Oregon that created the zebra paper that said zebras fix what unicorns break. And they really started to question why 10x? Why not 10%?
Yeah.
And so I'm happy to report we went live with our SOCAP podcast with Teresa Ish of the Walton Family Foundation this week. She was our pilot IF Impact Finance Center fellow, and she just did a negative 50% return investment to a for-profit sustainable seafood company, which out of her negative 100% grant dollars, which we would argue is an above market rate investment for her because she's going to get a 50% return on her money versus a negative 100% return on our money. And so we've kind of flipped that next generation of that zebra paper that says if angels invest in unicorns, do heroes invest in racehorses, and what about the champions and the catalysts? With the notion that we need full spectrum aligned capital. That if a startup or a small business or a nonprofit has a good idea, we should be able to give them the aligned capital that matches what that financial return, impact, risk, and liquidity is, not have to force it to fit into a 10x box.
In the Global Impact Industry Network, they talked about accelerating the development of a coherent impact investing industry. In your experience, where is the dissonance and the immaturity in the marketplace? What are the top 3 challenges for it in the next 5 years?
I believe right now that most of Wall Street was trained very well to be trained in silos. And the innovation in Wall Street is right now coming from those of us that weren't trained in Wall Street, that look at it as a system that has pipes that are either broken or need to be rewired. And I believe that the innovation is going to come around a couple areas: place-based impact investing and direct investing. But the most important work we do at the Impact Finance Center is actually around governance and bringing best practices of sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, and endowments at the $20+ billion level down to Main Street. Yeah. And so we've recently evaluated a $100 million foundation, and more recently a $15 million foundation. And essentially in the $100 million foundation found that they were spending an extra $1 million in fees over 5 years to lose $5 million. And so basically through that process, we've realized whether you're an individual or an organization, most of us have abdicated our investment beliefs, how we believe our money should be managed, not only around values, but fees and financial markets to Wall Street. And it's time for us to take that back. And once we take that back and decide what are the rules of the road of how we want our money managed, you can actually architect a solution that gives you the same, if not better, financial return, risk, and liquidity, but now positive impact aligned with your values.
Which brings us to Trickle Up Economics, to quote Andrew Yang, and Main Street 2.0.
Yes, Main Street 2.0 is a fun story. It came about a year ago. I was up in Duluth, Minnesota, completing my first half marathon, and my college roommates and their friends said, "Can you meet our former mayor?" And his name is Don Ness, and he's now running a $35 million private family foundation. And he said, "Stephanie," he's like, "I know how to be mayor, but I don't know how to run a private family foundation." And I said, okay, Don, tell me about it. And he told me about it. And they give away about 1.3 million to excellent nonprofits, but the same nonprofits for the same 10 years serving human services. And about 33.5 million annually is invested in Wall Street. And I said, Don, if you work with the Impact Finance Center, we have 47 tools, and we can get at least 20 of your 35 million invested back into Duluth, Minnesota, for the same, if not better, financial return, risk, and liquidity, and make sure the other 15 million isn't harming Duluth. But what we really want to do is work with you to identify the other 500 individuals and organizations with, say, more than $5 million who also care about Duluth, Minnesota. And then, because at least in the US, we've lost community banking, the old-fashioned relationship banking. And so we're going to have to take some of your grant dollars, and we're going to create a 0% student loan program and a alternative payday lending program that people can borrow money at 8%, and the student loan program would be at 0%. We can create a nonprofit grant advance model where if the nonprofit is going to get a grant assigned to it in 8 months out, that they can turn it over to an entity and get access to it immediately for cash flow. We have a Main Street character loan program run by an Australian in Colorado, Mike O'Donnell, and you can go get access if you have a good idea, good character, bad or no credit, up to $50,000 for a small business. And it's a guaranteed 3% return. So we can bring that product up to Duluth, Minnesota. And then we're going to have to grow investors. So we'll create a Duluth community note and a Duluth impact investing giving circle and a Duluth investment club and a Duluth guarantee model. And then here's the Main Street 2.0 piece. I'll say, Don, we don't want my great Aunt Jan taking her last money in her IRA out of global markets and investing it back into Duluth, Minnesota, without ensuring she's going to get the same, if not better, financial return, risk, liquidity, and now positive impact. And so we have to create safety net product. And that's a good use of your philanthropic capital to create guarantees, loan loss reserves, and custom insurance. So that if she takes her money out of global markets and actually invests in a Prodigy Coffee house, say in Duluth, Minnesota, or an affordable housing project, that she's going to be essentially insured that she's going to get the same, if not better, financial return, except now, not knowing where her money's going and what the impact is, she'll be able to go touch and feel it back in Main Street 2.0. So we say Main Street 2.0 is basically going back to the olden days, taking the best of Main Street, but bringing the Wall Street math, so we price risk and ensure that people can invest locally with getting the same, if not better, financial return.
And that investment, that insurance, is possible because by and large the sector as a whole is a profitable return.
Absolutely, especially when you start dealing with full spectrum capital. So if you look at what the financial return, impact, risk, and liquidity is. And so it turns out, if you actually look at microfinancing as a whole, the default rate is pretty good.
It's tiny for all my investments in Kiva.
Absolutely. It's done well. Let's take it student loans, for example, in the state of Colorado. We have 39 higher education institutions, and at least a couple of years ago, the lowest default rate was 12%. So if you're doing money out of your negative 100% money, that's a 88% return on your money plus a tax deduction. And the point is, we can price that. We can understand, okay, if that's the risk, we can actually set aside money that say, great, if an investor's going to invest in this, the philanthropic capital will pay for that default and ensure that the person's going to get the same, if not better, financial return. That's a use of philanthropic capital to actually de-risk retail investors to invest in their own community.
And can you talk to me about the transaction speed of what you've achieved? In the first 3 years, I believe you did 2, and then it...
Yeah, so it did. It was there's an analogy that somebody said it's like paddling an iceberg with flippers on. It takes a long time to get the iceberg moving. And so, like I said, from 2010 to 12, the Impact Finance Center supported 2 nonprofit transactions, and it took us 3 years to get those transactions done. Of the 40 plus, close to 50 new impact investors that we identified, educated, and activated, most of them are on their 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th investment right now, which means they're not even checking with us anymore when they do an investment. So I'm pretty sure the last 100 transactions have taken about 3 to 6 months. and we're in 2019 right now. So it took doing those 200 education events and actually activating enough people within the community to invest locally and prove that they could get the same, if not better, financial return and risk and liquidity.
And what percentage of the deal flow have you got in Colorado?
I'd like to tell people, let's just say 500 plus transactions we sourced over 3 years. If we got 10%, that means there's 50,000 transactions. But I'm sure we only got 1% of the deal flow. So if you look at, for example, a school or a museum art building, we believe that there's about $16 billion of school facilities in Colorado, another 15 million of health clinics in Colorado, and then another 10 to 15 million of nonprofit buildings. So really easily, that's just looking at one slice of debt in the nonprofit sector. We essentially believe there's close to $50 billion of deal flow. And you can take that same math and go for small businesses, startups, social enterprises. So we believe that we got 1% of the deal flow.
So this is a really accessible way for people with assets and finance to take their money from traditional investment funds and put it back into the place they live.
It is, absolutely. And the tricky part is, how does Wall Street get paid to do this? Because the reason this actually was stood up is because our nonprofit took a risk, and we risked a lot of our own personal money to actually do this. People don't get paid to do these small, high-risk transactions. And so how do we come together and develop this infrastructure so we can have a sliding scale broker-dealer? Because we know the deals are there. We know the money's there. So how do we incent Wall Street to actually grow and invest, to basically get paid to actually help an individual organization invest locally?
You've just answered what are some of the FIR fees around the space, no deal flow being one of them. Are there others that are there, that people they say these things that really don't have any validity to them?
I think how about this? A new problem we have is, let's say I become a new impact investor. Let's say I get activated from that perspective. There's not a place for me to go to get a concierge service to help me guide myself through this space. So I will now be approached by 30 to 40 organizations with investment opportunities or to join their club.
Yeah.
And versus that, we actually need to basically grow investor clubs. And those need to be small, peer groups where people can have trusted access with a concierge that says, hey, I want to learn how to invest in nonprofits this year. Can you help me learn how to get access to that deal flow, meet the people I need to meet, and actually do those investments, versus I want to learn how to invest in startups this year. So we right now don't have the infrastructure in place as we're growing these new investors to give them kind of a seamless experience. It's kind of, we're kind of putting them in the middle of the lake and asking them to swim.
Yeah, and taking your education and applying it to the existing angel groups, that wouldn't be a good place? Or is the capital variation massive compared to what we're talking about?
So when we look at, if you look at a $100 million portfolio,
they're not angel investors.
What percentage of a $100 million portfolio is angel investments?
6-7%?
Maybe. I would be shocked. I would bet of an angel, $100 million typical portfolio, probably a half to 1%, right? And so those people are trained in one little sliver of that 100 million, versus the concierge needs to basically understand debt and equity and venture and nonprofits and for-profits, and so could angel clubs expand to actually provide that non-conflicted education across the whole portfolio? Absolutely, they could, but that's not their members. But that is not their expertise. But I'd like to note that even angel investors have more than just angel investing in their portfolio. You wouldn't think they would based on how they respond, but they do.
What can you give me right now if I want to do an impact day?
Yeah, when somebody calls and says, we want to do impact days right now, what do we tell them to do? We say we have just piloted, we left impact days, and we said we need to grow investors faster, more efficiently. How do we do it? And we have an individual method, which is our fellowship program, and then we have a group fellowship, or the first investor accelerator called an Impact Investing Giving Circle. And this is what we recommend for anybody that wants to start their own impact days. And you can contact us. We'll happily give you an example grant, a glossy, support you in doing this. An impact investing giving circle is a T-ball or a little league, a first example for investors or donors to learn how to do their first 3 to 5 direct investments for as little as a $2,000 donation. It's social, it's fun. They learn 50 plus ways to activate their portfolio. They get to bring their pet social ventures to the table. Unlike another giving circle, there's a small chance some of the money will come back. They're not granting it away. They're doing loans and equity investments. If it does, they'll recycle it and do it again. So that allows an individual organization to do their first 3 to 5 direct investments in a low-cost, safe, fun way. And so we're really bullish on investor clubs kind of being the solution, not funds, but actually, so the concept of if recently large organizations have contacted us and said, can you help us with investors? And we'll say, we might have 2 or 3 or 4, but there's not enough investors activated in this space to give you the type of investment flow that you actually want. If you really want to grow investors, we'll work with you over 3 to 5 years and grow investor clubs and with the starter kit of the Impact Investing Giving Circle. So that's what we would recommend. Start your own Impact Investing Giving Circle. If you have a local community foundation, they know how to run a giving circle. And you can do it by a geography, you can do it by a community of interest, like sustainable food systems, or you can do it by identity, women, people of color, veterans. And in the case of Colorado, we're piloting the first ever Impact Investing Giving Circle with the Women's Foundation of Colorado. So it just started last month, and we have 36 women who will go through a 9-month process to learn how to do their first 3 to 5 direct investments, as well as the 50 plus ways they can activate their portfolio to support women.
Amazing.
It's fun.
If there was, for people out there who have access to capital, who have been investing it traditionally for a long time, if there's one thing you wanted them to know about impact investing, what would you tell them?
A couple of things. You already are doing impact investing the way we define it. There are positive and negative impacts of every single investment we do. For me, impact investing is just being explicit about what those investments are. So if somebody tells you that you're going to have to give up financial return, if somebody says you don't want to go this direction, you're probably not with the right person giving you advice. And so one of the key tools we're going to have over the next decade is just a simple evaluation of your money, whether it's an endowment, your investment advisor. Find a non-conflicted entity to come do an investment advisor evaluation and have them look at costs, fees, governance, and impact, and give you a non-conflicted assessment of, are you with the right person on your team? Or do you have the right person on your team?
And if there's one thing you wanted people in the world to know about the Impact Finance Center, what would you tell them?
All the pieces are on the table for us to move $1 trillion. We just have to work together to actually develop this public infrastructure and scale it. So if you want to be a part of this larger system and be a leader in your local community, please contact us, because we now believe that we have all the pieces of the puzzle on the table. We just have to get the resources and execute. So it's exciting times to be a part of us. So contact us. If we can support you in any way, we will.
Right. Is there anything I haven't asked that you would like to talk to?
I would like to ask how you learned about us and how you found yourself in Colorado.
I learned about you by typing in impact. Well, I looked at the impact investment survey by the Global Impact Investment Network, and when I decided that impact investing was what I wanted to focus my whole life around, as I'm really here to peel back the veil on the goodness of humanity and amplify it, impact investing is the obvious way to do that, telling those stories. And so I looked up the Global Impact Investment Network, I looked up the Asia Pacific Impact Summit, and then I took all the logos and handed it to my graphic designer and said, rebrand us so we look like the kind of people these people want to work with. And then just looked you up on LinkedIn and said hi.
That's wonderful. The last little hack I'll say that we haven't found the CFO ready to go on this journey with us, but we're close. Let's say I am talking to a foundation with $500 million. And the CFO would say to me, Stephanie, but I have to earn a 7% risk-adjusted return on that $500 million so that my program officers can give away $50 million. And I would say, well, what's your financial return right now? And they would say 7%. And let's say they care about Melbourne. It's a $500 million foundation in Melbourne. And I would say, what if I could give you an 8% return to keep that money in Melbourne? And they would say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, tell me something you're giving away that $1 million to, that grant money. And they would say, workforce housing.
Yeah.
And I'd say, okay, well, let's take $1 million that you were going to give away in workforce housing at negative 100% return in your own money.
Yeah.
$1 million you're going to give an 8% return. $1 million will give you an 8% return out of your endowment, and we'll reunite that money. Now you'll have $2 million, and the blended rate of return of $1 million at negative 100% and $1 million at 8 is negative 46.5% return.
Yeah.
You can do a lot of workforce housing if for every dollar you give out, you only have to get 54 cents back.
Yeah.
And so that's the point of what we'd like to say is, like, if we have a systems approach and financial hacking, we actually have the money to invest in ourselves if we just learn to kind of get out of our own way and solve the math.
Yeah, because if I pick a geography and an area of interest and have an amount of money that I'm currently giving, you're capable of identifying places to put that money, which gives me a much more positive return than minus 100%.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah. I am without a doubt convinced that we can give, whether you're a non-accredited or accredited investor, find areas for you to get the same, if not better, financial return and the impact that's aligned with your values.
There you go. If you want to have impact that aligns with your values, you've just heard how to get it done. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for joining.